Midterm examinations coming up, so I'll just spend a few minutes on that. I owe you a makeup class. Everybody looks worried. And the two classes I've got to do to bring myself up to date, and you, one of them is on Mount Carmel, which is not going to be in the exam. So I'm not going to do the makeup class. I'm not going to do the class on Mount Carmel. On Thursday, I saw that big smile over there and the clapping of the hands. Hooray! On Thursday, I'll talk about Sutton Hoo. Sutton Hoo is one of the exam topics. My tradition is never to give a class during exam week. Usually people have got lots of exams and people don't turn up anyway, so there's no point in doing a class. So Tuesday, Thursday, no class, free revision period. Now the exam date, Saturday the 26th. I would prefer 9:40 in the morning. Now I know that many students have a habit of studying until 6 o'clock in the morning, which is not recommended practice, because then you fall asleep. 9:40 means you can then finish it and relax for the rest of the weekend if you don't have any more exams, right? And you can recover in time to go out Saturday night to a party or whatever. The alternative time would be 2:40. So I would prefer 9:40. If anybody has got a genuine problem with that, okay, 9:40 Saturday, and I don't mean, oh, I've got a bus ticket to go to Alanya or something like that, a genuine problem, then let me know as soon as possible. Give me an acceptable excuse or reason. Midterm exam topics, there's 7 of them. They're on Moodle. Read what's in the textbook. Look at the extra links I give you in the thing on Moodle. Gives you extra information. I won't go into detail about what you need to study, but obviously, you know, you can see what I give you. That's a bare minimum. You might decide to look a bit further. One of the topics will be on Tutankhamun. Now, you might want to look at the DNA evidence a bit further, or learn the names of the tombs and what's in them a bit further. That's up to you. Extra information always helps. Basically, it'll be 5 of those topics will be in the exam. And you have to write one essay each on, or one essay on each of 3 topics. Okay, so 3 essays altogether. And obviously, the more information that comes out, then the better. So, for example, if there was something on Akhenaten, and you can mention the restoration stealer, you know, little important things like that. Okay, so that is on Moodle. All the slides are on Moodle up to today. I'll put today's on. And attendance records are up to date. There are 3 people with less than 60% attendance. Do make a note of your attendance. And let's get started on the class. Well, this is taken us outside the areas we've been looking at. Basically Europe and the Mediterranean world. What I want to do is to take you to one of the mysteries of archaeology in the 1920s, going into the 1930s to a certain extent, and that was the origins of civilization outside of the Middle East. And the story really begins in 1834, when this man, shown later in life, Alexander Cunningham, became an army officer in what was then a private company called the East Indies Company, which basically owned India. Private company. In 1861, India became a colony of the Great Britain. And Andrew Cunningham was made the first chief archaeologist of India. India, in this sense, modern India and Pakistan together. He was interested in archaeology and spent his spare time looking around for archaeological sites. He was particularly interested in what we would call the Iron Age of India, the time of the Buddhist religion. And he was very interested in looking at Buddhist monuments and Buddhist art. Some Buddhist art is very sexually explicit, and I sometimes wonder what his real interest was in making drawings of Buddhist art, but we don't know that now. In his search for more places where there might be evidence for the early practice of the Buddhist religion, in 1873 he made his way to a place called Harappa. Harappa is on the river Indus, the great river that runs from the Himalayas down into what is now Pakistan. It's more or less the border between India and Pakistan today. The actual border runs just a little bit to the east of the Indus River there. He did some limited excavation at Harappa. He was hoping to find evidence of Iron Age occupation, a Buddhist site. He didn't find anything at all really of that period. He found some buildings. His notes don't exist. We just know this from a later report. But one thing he did find that was very peculiar was some small pieces of clay, roughly about sort of 5 centimeters square, 7 centimeters square, which he recognized were seals used for making marks on something. This is a typical example of a Harappa seal. That's the seal proper. That's what you get when you push the seal into some wet clay. He noticed that they had some very strange symbols on these seals, so he decided perhaps I ought to find out what this is. It looks like a form of writing. And he decided I'll send them to the British Museum, but he died before he actually did, so he didn't get to the British Museum until 1912. He found them in 1873. Well, when they got to the British Museum, they realized this is potentially a very important discovery. It seems to be a form of writing. It's found at Harappa, right at the top of the Indus Valley. And where does all the material used in Mesopotamia, at Ur and Nineveh, where does it come from? Either it comes in the form of lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, so down the Indus River, or it's agate stones or carnelian stones, which come from India. So this started people thinking that there would probably be evidence of a Bronze Age Chalcolithic civilization somewhere in India that controlled this trade in raw materials from the Himalayas, Afghanistan, and from India to Mesopotamia. The only problem was that the realization that there might be something up here in the Indus Valley came about in 1912. And in August of 1914, the First World War started, so nobody could do any work on this particular topic. But it did draw attention, to stress this particular point that all these sites in Mesopotamia use raw material from Afghanistan, Egypt, India. This seemed to be a likely place to find a completely new civilization. The end of the First World War, British archaeologists finally had a chance to start looking for evidence for what there might be in India. The chief archaeologist of the time was Sir John Hubert Marshall, and he decided to send his assistants out to look up and down the Indus Valley to see what they could find. One of them was sent to Harappa. That seemed to be an obvious site. He arrived there in 1921 and found the remains of a very large settlement. It could be divided into two. There was a higher area, which he called a citadel, with remains of brick buildings on it, and what seemed to be a lower city down there. When they cleared away some of the soil, they found that these buildings had been made from fired brick, not mud brick. So the bricks had been made as part of an organized industry for building at Harappa. The assistant did a bit of excavation there, found some evidence of occupation. All the occupation levels, 8 of them, were of Bronze Age Chalcolithic date, which tied up with the dates of sites like and things like that. What was even more remarkable, though, was that the lower city seemed to have been built with a grid plan. it looked as if the streets were like that. It wasn't entirely clear. The earliest cities that we know of with a planned arrangement like this date to the Iron Age. But this is Bronze Age. Incidentally, does anybody know the only city in Turkey that has this type of plan? Erzincan, after it was rebuilt in the 1930s after the earthquake. The only place in Turkey that's actually got this type of plan. So if you ever go to Erzincan, it's something you can remember. Makes it easy to find your way around, I will say that. However, this looked to be really quite an interesting site in many ways, but Sir John Marshall thought, well, yes, it might be, but Harappa is right up the Indus Valley. It's 1,000 kilometers from the sea. I can't really see this being the center of a Bronze Age civilization. So, no, we've got to find something else. So he sent off another one of his assistants who keep on looking down the Indus Valley. And the other assistant found a site at a place called Mohenjo-Daro. Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead. Fascinating place name. This is 1,000 kilometers away from Harappa, but when the assistant started walking around it, he found a city with a plan that looked like the one at Harappa. Here we have Mohenjo-Daro. Citadel, a higher point, lower town, evidence of a street grid. That's Harappa. Citadel, lower town, evidence of a street grid. And all the material that could be found at Mohenjo-Daro seemed to be of Bronze Age date. Mohenjo-Daro was discovered in 1923. In 1922, Sir John Herbert Marshall had written a newspaper article saying there is no evidence at all of Bronze Age civilization in the Indus Valley. Now, the evidence was there. It was quite obvious from the similarity between Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa that even though they were 1,000 kilometers apart, they were connected in a cultural sense. Buildings made of fired brick, citadel, lower city with a street plan. Mohenjo-Daro is also producing evidence of seals, the same type of things that have been found at Harappa. They had to belong to the same period. They had to represent evidence of a civilization that controlled the whole of the Indus Valley. 1,000 kilometers if you go by the river Indus, 650 kilometers if you can fly from one to the other. This is bigger than anything in Mesopotamia, the traditional origin of the cities. Well, obviously, this meant that the site had to be excavated, and Sir John Marshall did the first excavations from 1924 to 1931. A second series of excavations took place between 1944 and 1950 under this man, the British archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler, who's really the founder of modern archaeology. He established the techniques that all archaeologists use today. Most of their work was done on the citadel area. Working in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, the discoveries at are still very fresh in everybody's mind. What they're thinking of is we have a civilization. A civilization has got to have a palace for a king or a temple for a god. This is going to exist on the highest point, the most important point of the city. So they concentrated their work on the citadel area up here. One problem with working up there was that a large part of the site was covered by this here. It's a stupa. It's a temple to the dead, a Buddhist temple to the dead. But in this aerial photograph, you can see the citadel quite clearly, the lower city down there. Well, that's what the stupa looks like on top of the citadel from the lower city, if you go there today, and the stupa at sunset. This meant there was one large part of the site they couldn't possibly excavate, but they could start working on the rest of the citadel. What they found was a surprising series of buildings. Everything was made of mud brick. Everything belonged to the Bronze Age period. There was no obvious temple, no obvious palace. It is possible, still possible, it might be underneath the stupa. But they couldn't find any evidence of a palace or a temple here. There isn't one at Harappa. They did find some rather strange buildings. So one, for example, over here, which they thought might be a granary, it might be a storage place for food. Well, more recent analysis suggests it may have had a wooden superstructure. It may have been some kind of meeting hall. The strangest discovery that was made, however, was what's known as the Great Bath, this structure over here. The Great Bath is a very peculiar structure. It measures 12 by 7 meters, a maximum depth of 2.4 meters. This is an aerial view of it, and you can see there are steps going down on either side. It's made of fired brick. It's covered with tar, black stuff on the inside originally to stop the water from running out. There were seats along the side, as you can see there, and you can see the steps coming in. And originally it had been surrounded by a veranda, a covered area. But the pool itself was open. What this was used for, nobody really knows. Archaeologists remember when they can see something that's made for a specific purpose, but we don't know what the purpose is, we use that wonderful word, ritual, which means we don't know what it's for. But it's obviously connected with some form of public activity or sacred ceremony or something like that. But exactly what, nobody has any idea. But it was something that was in regular use. This is Bronze Age dates, so we're talking 1300 BC or thereabouts. It was something in regular use. People could sit down inside it. It might have been used for baptizing people. You become a member of the community or a religion, you go into this pool. It was obviously kept clean and washed out on a regular basis. It had this amazing drain system coming out from underneath it. The drain is about 1.5 meters tall. Well, these were the only two buildings of significance discovered on the citadel. Mortimer Wheeler, Herbert Marshall, both basically came to the conclusion there might be a temple or a palace underneath the stupa, but there isn't a temple or palace at Harappa. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are identical, so perhaps there never was a temple or palace here. In other words, this is a city that doesn't have any clear evidence of a structured social system. Somebody on the top and lots of people at the bottom. Kind of early democratic system, if you like. Well, in addition to working in the citadel, both Marshall and Mortimer Wheeler did some work down here in the lower town, more recent excavations shown at the top there. They established quite early on that it has a regular street grid and surprisingly well-preserved building. Well-preserved buildings with drains running down the streets. Herbert Marshall looking like everybody's kind of idea of an archaeologist. He's got a sun hat on, but he hasn't got shorts and socks, unfortunately, or a long beard for that matter, but incredibly well-preserved remains. Excavation then stopped after Mortimer Wheeler until the 1980s because of the problems of protecting the remains from the environment. But since then, more work has been done by American archaeologists, George Dales, and currently by Jonathan Kanoya. So the work is still continuing there. I put these up just so that you can actually see people. You know, it's easy to talk about somebody You don't get any idea of what they look like, but they're real people. They're not just names in the book. One of the more interesting discoveries made by Marshall and Mortimer Wheeler, and it's been repeated in more recent excavations, is that the remains of the lower city are covered with mud, evidently indicating a flood of some kind. And when the mud was removed, what you find in some parts of Mohenjo-Daro is this. Skeletons of people who clearly have not been buried properly. They are just lying there in all shapes and directions, some on their sides, some on their back, some on their face. Sometimes like this, as if the person has been pushed over. The evidence suggested quite clearly that at some point in its history, Mohenjo-Daro had suffered an enormous flood while people were still in the city. A flash flood. And basically people had just been killed as they were trying to escape from this. More importantly, from an archaeological perspective, was the clear evidence, once the site began to be properly excavated, of this very regular street grid system. The earliest grid system that we know of anywhere in the world. At least 400 years older than the earliest of the Greek settlements with a system like this. So, I mean, really quite an astounding technological development, social development. Straight streets make it easier to keep the place clean. You can also watch people. The police are much better able to control people. The main streets, generally around about 10 meters wide, carefully designed so that instead of going up a hill on a slope, you have a series of steps like that. So clearly not used by wheeled traffic very much. You could use wheeled traffic, carts to a certain extent, but you'd have a bit of a problem getting up the hill on the top. There were also minor streets, which are roughly about 4 meters wide, that run between the buildings, and you can see how perfectly straight these are. And even alleyways. Alleyways generally round about 1 meter, 1.5 meters wide, running between the individual buildings, giving access to back doorways. Same street with children, same street without them. So you've got the archaeological view there. Well, the evidence of the streets indicates a high degree of social organization, planning, somebody in charge. We need to do this, we need to do it like that, etc., etc. But this group of people are also aware of the problems of living in a crowded city. You need drains. You need drains to carry away the wastewater from rain. You need drains to carry away refuse, sewage, and that type of thing. In fact, when you look at the houses of Mohenjo-Daro, they're not identical, but they're all basically built to the same common plan, using fired brick. Usually it's a courtyard house with something like a water tank and an open courtyard, surrounded by rooms on either side, sometimes a private well. Clear evidence of more than one level of flooring, steps going up to an upper floor there. Clear evidence of private bathrooms in most of these houses. 1300 BC. We're not, you know, this is really quite an advanced settlement in many ways. Clear evidence of connection to the drain system. So you have your bath, you pull the plug out, the water goes down into the street drain. This is highly organized planning. Private toilets. You don't see private toilets in Greek cities and Roman cities until very later on. This is the Bronze Age, Chalcolithic period here. Unfortunately, it also became clear, and it is very clear, that some methods of dealing with human waste have not changed in Pakistan since the time of Mohenjo-Daro. This is a drain for a toilet coming from an upper floor at Mohenjo-Daro. You have exactly the same type of thing in buildings in Pakistan today. This is a simple drain coming out of the side of the house. You have exactly the same type of thing in parts of Pakistan today. Well, excavation of the houses revealed that some of them were private houses, but most of the houses did have some evidence for a workshop, some kind of activity. A few of them, for example, were pottery workshops, making this very distinctive pottery, showing water buffaloes there, for example, and those are monkeys on that one over there. The most exciting discovery was that several of the houses were connected with jewelry working. So, for example, here you have waste material from making jewelry. You've got beads, some broken, some not. You've got some of these seals as well. Beads, in this case, of a kind of almost like a glass. There are no carnelian ones in that, unfortunately. Gold jewelry workshops producing very high quality items, as you can see here, sometimes using natural stones in connection with gold as well. Really fascinating thing was the discovery that the people who lived in the Indus Valley civilization, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, had a shared common system of weights. Wherever you excavate, you find stone weights needed for weighing out gold and other precious things. And it works on a binary decimal system. So the smallest one is 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and so on and so on and so on, all the way up like that. The basic unit is about the equivalent of 85 grams. Well, that's a pretty surprising discovery. Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, using the same system of weights. They are definitely connected with each other. If that's not surprising enough, the brick sizes at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro are exactly the same as well. We're talking about a river which 650 kilometers from one end to the other, Mohenjo-daro to Harappa, 1,000 if you actually follow the river. They've got the same system of weights, the same system of linear measurements as well, same brick sizes. This society is really something very interesting. A few other pieces of evidence from the excavation indicating aspects of daily life. So, for example, this lovely little pottery toys like this. The wood has been reconstructed. My favourite is the potter going to the market with the water buffaloes like that. A few artifacts of bronze, as you would expect for a Bronze Age site, so a bronze toy chariot. We assume these are toys, but we don't actually know. And even statuettes. So, for example, this one, we call it the dancing girl. Nobody can quite work out who she is, what she is. She's naked, she's obviously young, 14, 16, with lots of bracelets at one arm and some bracelets on the other, just wearing a simple necklace. Women seem to have played an important role in the society if we accept the evidence of the many clay figurines or pottery figurines of women. They're always shown with lots of jewellery on and fancy belts on and elaborate hairstyles. We don't know the significance of these. Are they toys? Are they religious symbols? Do they indicate some kind of inner meaning that women actually have a very important role in the society? There were a few examples of sculpture found there. The sculpture at Mohenjo-daro shows some very strange influences. You've got this one here, which made of a white stone which is not found in India. I can't remember where it comes from. But if you look at the basic form of the statue, it shows Mesopotamian or Egyptian influence. But when you look at that other head, it seems to show an African. It's not certain at all who it shows. So there's all sorts of strange influences going on here. One of the most remarkable pieces of statue is this. It's just the torso, the central part of the statue, made of a red sandstone, which is not found anywhere in India. So it's found from outside of India. Originally, it had arms, nipples, a head, and a penis of a different coloured stone. Those have gone now. But if you look at the proportions of this, if you ignore the missing arms and decoration, this could be a work from classical Greece or classical Roman period. But it just sticks out like that in the middle of Mohenjo-Daro. One remarkable piece of sculpture found on a shelf, just not that high actually, again seems to represent an important person in Mohenjo-Daro. You can see he's got bracelets there, wearing some kind of tunic, an elaborate headband. He's called the priest king, but we don't actually know who this represents or what this represents, but clearly some kind of important person in that particular society. The work at Mohenjo-Daro, well, still continues. Work takes place at Harappa as well. What we find at Harappa is exactly the same types of things we find in Mohenjo-Daro. No evidence at all of a temple or a palace on the Citadel Hill. One very large building, which again looks like it might be a granary, but we don't actually know what it's used for. So what we have with the Indus Valley civilization is something really very odd. A whole range of sites, which are all can be dated to the Chalcolithic or to the Bronze Age period, along the valley of the Indus, Harappa in the north, Mohenjo-Daro down here. All these sites, well, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are the biggest by far, but they produced the same type of material we find at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. No evidence of rulers or an organized religion, but all belonging to the same social system, all belonging to, if you like, the same civilization. We don't know how this society operated. There are no big monuments or statues commemorating kings or generals. There's no evidence of an army. In you have soldiers to keep the people under control as well as to deal with enemies. There's nothing like that for the Indus Valley civilization. The evidence suggests that if there was some kind of ruling class, this ruling class was not really different from the people who lived in the cities. The people in the cities trusted their rulers, the rulers trusted the people. The rulers might have been priests. That's how we would normally explain a society like this. Mesopotamia, priest kings, but there's no evidence of an organized religion. They could be traders, they could be merchants, they could be landlords. We really don't know. The other big problem is their writing. What has been found at Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa and other sites have been a number of clay seals, what seem to be writing tablets, even pottery with symbols on them. Over 400 separate symbols have been recognized. Well, if there are more than 400 symbols, this is not an alphabet. An alphabet, maximum of about 30, 32, something like that. One big problem with trying to understand this writing system, if that's what it is that only 2 examples of writing are longer than about 7 symbols. There's no big stone with lots of it on. The longest inscription in the Indus Valley script is 17 signs. Most of them are a lot less than that. 4 or 5 is the normal number. Well, people argue about what this means. Is it a non-linguistic language? Is it some form of sign language? It's not really a language. Ownership marks, that type of thing. Could it be that it represents an unknown language? Somebody really, nobody really knows. But somebody in 2009 had the brilliant idea to analyze all these signs and see how they fitted together, and came up with the conclusion that it represents a language of some kind. It's not arbitrary. You find certain symbols coming up together. So it is a language of some kind. What language? No idea whatsoever. It may be what's known as Proto-Dravidian, which is the ancestor of the languages spoken from Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, but nobody knows. Most of the examples of Indus Valley writing are found on seals. In this case, they could be ownership marks, some kind of symbol to recognize a particular trader. Usually the seals have animals on them. So for example, we have water buffaloes here, an elephant there, and a rhinoceros there. But a few have a seated person. Now, some people think that this represents a scribe, a person who is writing down something. If you look at Egyptian art, you see this reasonably common. So it could be a scribe. But other people draw attention to the fact, the fancy headdress, this is the Hindu yoga position for the god Shiva. So there might just be a little hint that the origins of the Hindu religion can be put back to the Indus Valley civilization. What are problems with understanding social organization? Problems with understanding the script? We are beginning to get a little bit more information about the Indus Valley civilization. For a start, we can put its origins, its real origins, back to about 5,500. So it's roughly contemporary with early Egypt, early Crete, and things like that. The dominant period, though, is around about 3000 BC. So that's, and if I got that right, 5,500, 3000 BC. By 3000 BC, what we've got are sites of the Indus Valley civilization all the way up the Indus Valley and wherever possible along the lowland in that particular area. These are all sites that basically produce the same type of material. But none of these sites are anywhere near the size of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa can be seen as kind of capital cities. They're linked, but how and why, we don't know. We can begin to put it into the Indus Valley civilization into a context, in seeing it as a trading civilization. Many of the materials used at Ur, Babylon, Nineveh, have to come from the Himalayas, Afghanistan, or the Indus Valley. So we can reconstruct it's somehow tied in with a trading system with Mesopotamia. We can see what the people of Mesopotamia got from the Indus Valley civilization, but we can't see what the people of the Indus Valley civilization got from Mesopotamia. There's no imported materials. There is nothing to export in Mesopotamia except food. Mesopotamia, very rich agriculturally, but so is the Indus Valley. So there still is a bit of a problem in trying to work this out. Climatic evidence ties in with archaeological evidence to indicate that round about 1800, 1700 BC, the Indus Valley civilization went into a rapid decline. Most of the cities, the larger settlements, were abandoned. One explanation for this is climatic. The climatic evidence actually comes from Mesopotamia. It suggests that the climate was getting cooler and drier from 1800 onwards. Well, if you're not getting the monsoon rains, if you're not getting enough moisture, you can't grow enough food to support the 2 million, 3 million people that depended on the Indus Valley civilization. People start dying off, people don't produce families. You can see the trade system would collapse as well, because climatic change affects wind movements. How do you sail from India to here if the wind you need coming from the east doesn't happen in the summer? How do you sail back later in the year if the wind is no longer coming from the west? So we can see what's happening here. There has to be some form of climatic event that starts the downfall. But the real cause of the end of the Indus Valley civilization is connected with climatic change. Pakistan suffers regularly from intensive floods. A hard winter, lots of snow on the Himalayas. If it melts very quickly, you get so much water coming down in the spring and the early summer, the rivers can't deal with it. This is the flooded areas in Pakistan in August, just 1 year ago. You can see all along the Indus Valley, Mohenjo-Daro's up there, down here, Harappa's up there. This is what the flood looks like when it suddenly hits the town. This is the town of Pir Sahib in 2010. Within 5 minutes, a wall of water went through the city. The city couldn't cope with it. Look at the difference. This seems to have been what really brought about the final collapse of the Indus Valley civilization. Excavations at Mohenjo-Daro have revealed evidence of 7 different flood episodes before that final flood episode. The 2010 flood in Pakistan affected 1/5 of the country, flooded 1/5 of the country. It directly affected 20 million people, property damage and things like that. Actual deaths are only 2,000, but this is 2010 we're talking about. Helicopters, things like that. Imagine what a flood like this would have done to Mohenjo-Daro. So that seems to be why the Indus Valley civilization collapsed. But there's still so many questions to answer about this one. This is the big mystery for archaeologists today. Okay.